Hi, it's Bimerzen with another video, and today I will be changing gaskets on the oil filter housing on my N42 engine. So the gaskets on the oil filter housing right here are very common cause of oil leaks, and one way to spot it is to just check this cavity over here, and if you see oil pooling there, then it's probably the oil filter housing. Another gasket is here in between the oil filter housing and the oil cooler, and as you can see I have an oil leak here. So there is some residue going down and on the side of the engine. So it is definitely time to replace both of the gaskets. So what you will need to do is you will need to remove the intake cowling and the airbox and then this acoustic cover right here. And then you undo some bolts and then you will be able to get to the gaskets and replace them. So first you have to remove this intake cowling. As I said, you have to remove two pins. First you just pull the center pin out and then you will be able to remove this whole rivet. So the rivets are right here, and once you remove them you just pull out this intake cowling. Next we have to remove this acoustic cover and we need to undo two nuts here. Then you just pull it out slowly towards the front. Then we have to remove the airbox to 10 millimeters on the side. Then we release the metal clamp on the auxiliary throttle here. And we also have to unplug this little vacuum hose here. Be careful, it could be brittle and it can break. If that happens, you have to replace it. And of course, we also have to disconnect the mass airflow sensor here. You have to squeeze two tabs and pull it out. Now this could be a bit tricky because it's hard to reach on the other side. So in that case, you can just try and wiggle it with both your fingers. Airbox is out. Now we have to drain the oil from the oil filter housing. And the way to do that is to just unscrew the filter element cover. And you can do that by hand, of course, if it is tightened correctly. Now first we just need to unscrew the lid, but not all the way out. So we only need to reach the O-ring on the side. Okay. And now we just have to leave it like this for a couple of minutes. That's because the oil filter housing has a drain back channel. So once you unscrew the lid, the excess oil drains back into the engine block and it doesn't enter the engine oil intake. So this prevents any contaminants from entering the engine. So I'm just going to leave it here. Now, if I take a look on the other side, I can see that there clearly is some oil leak going on. So, as you can see, plenty of oil residue on this side. And I think that this is because of this gasket here that mates the oil cooler and the oil filter housing. And then it drains down and into that cavity over here. And yeah, definitely needs to be replaced. There is quite a lot of residual oil in the oil cooler and the oil filter housing. So what we need to do now is protect the alternator that is located right underneath. So we don't want any debris or oil enter that area. So that's why I will be using my old shirt from H&M, which is survived so far, but it ain't gonna survive any longer. So I'm going to put it underneath and protect the alternator and prevent any oil spills underneath. Then I'm going to release this rubber holder here for the wiring harness. So this should give us some freedom. Now we have to remove 4 torque bolts and I'm going to show you where they are on my other engine that is out of the car and on the engine stand. So the first torque bolt is here, the second one is below that, and one on this side and one here on the top. So we have to remove them on the car. I've decided to remove the whole oil filter housing because these bolts are quite tricky to get to. So if I remove the oil filter housing, it should be much easier to remove the bolts here. So we have 3 bolts that we have to undo. Now I'm going to remove the oil filter element. Now I'm going to use a paper towel to soak up the residual oil so the unfiltered oil doesn't enter the engine. Now I should be able to remove the oil filter housing. It's pretty stuck. I'm going to use a flat screwdriver and try to break it free. Okay. With the oil filter removed, it should be much easier to remove the bolts. Just make sure that you have your rag ready because there's gonna be some oil. Here's the oil filter housing. If you want to know more about the oil path and oil channels, you can check my video on that. That is linked up in the card. So basically, here is the gasket that we have to replace, and the other gasket is here. And this is the check valve that we need to check. So I can't see any apparent damage. If I press it down, it seems like it closes normally. I can't feel any issues. Now let's see inside, and maybe we can see something. Now I'm going to remove the old gasket. And as you can see, it's pretty stiff and it breaks easily. So it's definitely time to replace it. As you can see, it just breaks away. The bottom gasket is removed. Now let's do the same here. I'm going to try and start removing the gasket somewhere where it doesn't need to seal. So here is a good spot. And again, it's really brittle, so it just breaks apart. Okay, with the old gaskets removed, I'm going to clean everything up and make sure that it's as clean as it can be. And the oil filter housing is now cleaned, and I've also installed the new gaskets, and I've also cleaned the mating surfaces, so everything is now ready to be put back together. Make sure that the oil cooler engages with these 2 pins here. First, I'm going to make them hand tight, and then we have to torque them to 8 Newton meters. With the Torx bolts torqued down, it's time to reinstall the oil filter housing back onto the engine block. And we put back the bolts. The documentation states this should be torqued down to 22 Newton meters. However, I think that this is a mistake, because this is an M8 bolt in aluminum block, so 22 Newton meters is much too high. Usually the 10 millimeter bolts are torqued to 10 Newton meters, so that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to screw in the oil filter. And you can make this hand tight. Well, the official torque is 25 Newton meters, but I usually just tighten it down by hand and it's good enough. And the oil filter gaskets are replaced, and now we just have to put everything back together in reverse order. And when you're putting back the acoustic cover, make sure that these two pins here at the back engage with the holders at the intake manifold. Otherwise, the cover will rub against the cabin filter housing, and that's not what you want. So you really have to make sure that it sits correctly. And finally, everything is back together. So I hope that you've learned something useful, and I hope that you enjoy your oil leak-free BMW while it lasts. We all know that won't be long. But anyway, thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if you have N42 or N46 engine or E46 BMW. And in the meantime, keep zen and continue the art of BMW maintenance.